Hello, my name is Philip, and today I'm going to show you how you can create your very own element for Visual Composer. Keep in mind that in this video we are not going to go through stuff like how to structure your element or how to style it. So you definitely need some HTML, CSS and JavaScript, preferably the React framework knowledge, to comfortably create your own custom elements. Having said that, let's dive straight into it. First of all, what you need to know is in order to create your very own Visual Composer element, you will need to create a separate plugin for it, for WordPress. How this plugin works is it will take the elements that you have and with some PHP insert them one by one into your Visual Composer website. I already have a demo of this plugin set up in my local instance, and the link for this demo plugin will be provided in the description of this video. This demo plugin already does have some elements inside it, and in this PHP file, one by one, all of these elements are inserted into your Visual Composer website. However, we will not use these elements because they already have some styling, they have some functionality for it. We will create one element from scratch, so we will remove all of these, and I will show you how I would go about creating an element from ground up. For that, we also have an element boilerplate. It's the cleanest, most simple element that there is. Basically, nothing to it. It's simple, clean, and doesn't have much code in it. I already pre-downloaded it in my downloads folder. Basically, what I will do now is simply copy this folder, go into this plugin folder, and insert it into our elements folder here. Now at this point, I will also rename this folder. That's because this should be consistent with the naming scheme of the element. We'll be creating a square border button, so we'll name it as that. And also in every element there's one more folder for the element code, and we will also rename that. At this point we can go to our code editor. The element should appear here, yes it is, and add this element to the elements to register. Basically now this plugin will go through the elements folder, take this element and insert it into our Visual Composer instance. So now let's go create a new page with Visual Composer where this plugin is activated. And while we're doing that, we can open a new terminal because just adding an element won't do. We also need to install and build it. So let's go to the elements folder, square border button, and we need to run a few commands in this folder. First of all, we need to install all the dependencies. You don't need to think much about that. All the dependencies are already set here and some scripts are. So you don't need to think about that very much. If you are going in this direction and if you're taking the boilerplate, all you need to do is just yarn install and it will do things automatically. As you see now in my Visual Composer instance, I have only a basic button, a row and a text block, and that's it. So while the element is building, we'll do some very important steps. So in the manifest.json file, this is the main file for the classification of the element, like its name, its images, description, and also its tag. As you can see, it's still element boilerplate. Let's change it to square border button, also in elements here. Another important thing is this misc. It's related to Visual Composer element categories. We have buttons, we have media, we have other. Since we're creating a button, we will change these categories to button. Now I also will fill up all the fields with name, description, and the images. And also we will update the images since there are no such images in our elements folder just yet. Let's go to the square border button folder. Within it there is a public folder, and here you see are the preview element, boilerplate, and preview element thumbnail. I have already downloaded 2 images for our border button. Let's paste them here, and these paths should match the names of those images here. We need to do one last step regarding the naming of the element. So the tag square border button is also important that it should match in the settings.json file. There is an attribute tag here. It's a protected, and the value should be the same. Don't worry, we will dive a little bit deeper into all of this later. For now, we just need to get our element up and running. After all of this is done and yarn install has finished, you also need to run a command yarn build. But since we're going to be working hands-on with the element right now, we can yarn watch, and what it will do, it will build the element, and after that it will actively listen to all the changes that we do to the element and rebuild them, and so on and so on. So we don't have to run yarn build every single time. Let's wait a little. Yarn watch is usually pretty fast. Okay, now it's done. This indicates that the element is being watched. Let's go to our instance, refresh the page, and now you can see we have a square border button under buttons. But if we add it, obviously nothing happens. It's just an element boilerplate. It only has a content and like some color, and that's it. As clean as possible. Now, how I would approach creating a new element is, first of all, we need to think about what attributes do we need for this element. So I will quickly show you a small copend that we found. We will be creating this button with this awesome hover effect for the borders. And first step is to think what attributes we need for this element. Attributes in Visual Composer are all of these slots available here. Like you can check title color, element ID, extra class, like design options. Every single thing that you may think you may want to do with this element is an attribute. And Visual Composer provides a lot of attributes, like over 30, like Ajax form, animated dropdown, attach image, attach video, autocomplete, and so on and so on. The link for all of those attributes will also be in the description of this video. You can go check it out. Our API documentation is very extensive and you can find a lot of useful things here. So for this element, we definitely need to cover the text of this button. We need to think about the background color of the button, the border color of the button, the text color of the button, the width of this border, and like also the alignment should be on the left side, on the right side, or in the middle. So now that we have thought about these attributes, let's tackle them one by one. Let's go to our code editor, and we can close up the manifest and start working. All the attributes are stored in the settings.json file. Most important thing to notice here is there are 2 edit forms, edit form tab 1, and then the design options. And we will not touch design options. We can simply move this down, not to mix up. We can move this down. We will also not touch meta custom ID as it is already pretty set. Basically all the default things like custom class we also won't touch. This is protected general, we don't need this. What we will work with is edit form tab 1, and we can actually in this case delete all the original attributes. And at this point we can delete them also here. Now we're in our edit form. All that's left is meta custom ID and custom class. When we will declare a variable here, an attribute, there are 2 access types. There is either protected or there's public. Basically what it means is if an access is public, then this attribute has access in the component.js file, which is the main element file. And here from the attributes, it deconstructs it, as it said here, from the settings.json file, and we can use it. So first things first, let's start with the button text. For the button text, we will use the string attribute. We already recoded it here. This access will be public, so it can be acceptable in component.js. Type will be string. The value is read more. This is the default value, and the label will be button text. Now we need to add this button text. We can replace simply output since we're no longer using it here. And we can then use it in our return. At this point, we can go reload this page, add the button, and as you can see, read more is set here, but we don't yet see it in our general tab. In order for it to appear in the general tab, here where the edit form tab 1 comes into place. We also need to add this button text here. And the sequence in which they appear here will be the sequence in which they appear in your general tab. Next point that we should think about is the button on-click action or URL. We have an attribute URL for that. And basically what it does, it allows the user to set one of two main features for the button. It's either a link or it can trigger a pop-up. Button URL is a little more complicated, but you don't need to think a lot about it since the functionality behind it comes from the Visual Composer plugin directly. So we add a button URL here in our edit form tab 1, and now we need to tackle it here in our component.js file. First of all, let's add it from the attributes. Now regarding it, there are a little more steps that we need to do. First of all, for element that will have an URL attribute, we need to create a custom tag. By default, that will be button. Actually, let's move all of this down a little for now and remove this mixin. We will create our own later on, and this is okay for now. So first of all, we are creating a custom tag which is button by default, but if there will be a link inserted, then it will change to an A tag. For this we will use a simple if statement. I will paste it now and explain it a little bit later. Now also one more step is to add this custom tag to our markup. Custom tag, close custom tag, and the button text should be inside it. Also, I will encapsulate this button text in a span tag, but this is specifically for the styling purposes of this button. So what happens here? This element receives an attribute button URL, and it checks if within this button URL there is a URL attribute, which comes from the link selector that will be here. If you added a link, it will change the custom tag to A and add properties to it like a title, a link, a target, a follow-no-follow relationship, and all such stuff. But you don't need to think a lot about it since the functionality behind this, as I said, comes from the Visual Composer builder itself. At this point, we can move forward and we can start using our colors and our mixins. Let's start with the first one, with the title color. I will move this down a little bit also, since we don't need it now. So how mixins work in Visual Composer is, for instance, for title color, we will create a separate CSS mixin. in the CSS mixins folder. For now there's only boilerplate color mixin, but we'll actually rename that one. And we need to add the title color also here in the edit form tab, so that it also appears there. Now let's rename this mixin to title color. And mixins come from the index.js file. Here, as you can see, editor CSS requires editor CSS. That is for just the styling that you see in the editor. And then there are mixins. There's boilerplate color mixin. Rename this to title color here. Also, the default CSS is false here. We will change this a little bit later, since we do want to have this button to have some stylings, but we will change this later. Also, while we're in this file, we can change the name of the component. Let's rename it correctly as square border button. Also rename it here in the import, and in the component here where export default class, let's also rename it here. Okay, now at this point I will also do some things related with classes, as these are default ones and we will use our custom ones. So container class, wrapper class, classes, and basically those come in the markup of the element. We define them here and then add them later in the markup. As I said, we won't be going through how we mark up this element. And basically we have a container, a wrapper, and then the button inside of it. This span is only for the styling purposes of this hover effect of the button. And also quickly I will adjust this. This is how we use design options. We will talk about this a little bit later. So now, in order to use the mixin, what we need to do is get the mixin data. This is first step. We get it this way. This get mixin data title color. This function comes from the Visual Composer element. And then in case if we do have this mixin data, which is title color, and this comes from this naming here, mixin title color, we can create a small if, and if there is mixin data at this moment, we will add a new class to classes, so the class name of this component. Now we have to go into the mixin itself. As you can see, it has some predefined styles here, but we will change them a little bit differently. So if there is this class, VCE square border button title color, which we add here, VCE square border button title color, then do some CSS styling. Like the color will be set to this color. At this point, the mixin is added. We have it in our attributes. We add a class to the component here, and the styling is also done. Now let's go and check. Refresh the page. Add the button. As you can see, now it's styled a little bit as a button. That's because we added the functionality of the link selector, and the title color is working. If I set it to green, it's actually green. So now I will quickly also add other mixins for the background, for the border color, and it will be done in the similar fashion as to the title color. So you don't actually need to do all of this. So you can see I added background color, border color, and border width. All of this will be using their own mixins. Now let's also add them into our edit form. Background color, and border width. That's it for the mixins. Now we actually need to create them. This is for background color. For border color. And for border width. Okay, I renamed this a little incorrectly. All right. Now we have all of these mixins here. We added them attributes for them in the settings.js. We also need to add those mixins here now. And how we do it is pretty simple. In this mixins object, we will simply add all of the other ones. So title color, background color, border width. The same thing will go for the component.js file. So we already established mixin data here. We didn't use a constant for it, so we can simply override it. And that's exactly what we will do. So once this is done, it sets mixin data to background color, and if there is data from this mixin, it adds another class. Then it sets mixin data to border color. If there is this data, it adds another class, and the same thing for border color. If there's data, it adds another class. Make sense? All right, so after that, next step would be to toggle the alignment of the element. For the alignment, we will use yet another attribute, and it will be button group. So basically this attribute will have 3 buttons with 3 distinct icons. One indicates a left alignment, the other indicates center alignment, and the third a right alignment. And how we will tackle this button is actually pretty simple. Let's not forget to add this attribute to our edit form tab. And this is the last attribute. So we can do it like this, clean up the code here a little bit. So how we will tackle this is we go to component.js. We add alignment here. So this also comes from the attributes. You can notice that we don't use mixins here. Those don't come from attributes. We get the data, but the alignment will come from attributes. And how we'll do this is pretty actually simple. Let's go after the mixins part. And if there is some data from the alignment, then just for the container, we will add a specific class with this data set on the end of it, and it will be handled with CSS, and that's pretty simple. Now, in order for the CSS to work, we need to actually create a separate file. So in this square border button folder, we create a styles.css file. You can name it whatever you want, but you need to add it here. So in our index.js file, where we handle CSS and styling, in the element boilerplate, the CSS is set to default. What we need to do is require that CSS file the same way it's required for the editor CSS. So we change this false to require styles.css, and this way this CSS that we put inside this file will be applied for the element. Now I will copy some styling that I have already coded before for this element. What we do here is basically we handle the alignment. So if there is this class for the button, it aligns left. If this, it aligns right. If this, it aligns center. And we handle it here. And then there's some default styling for the hover functionality of the borders and stuff. At this point, we can actually go reload the page and check how our element is behaving. Let's add the element, and yeah, it looks good. As you can see, the styles are already working. They come from styles.css. The color should also be working fine. We can set this to green, the border also to green, and let's set background color, the border width, and the alignment. So here it is, your element is working. Now, having said that, we have used only a scratch of the attributes that Visual Composer provides. There are tons more attributes that you can use, tons more functionality, and there is no one certain path of how you can do things with coding. So feel free to investigate on your own. All of the useful links will be provided in the description, and I hope it helped.